She stepped into the jet bridge with a carry cup cooling in her palm and the smell of jet fuel bleeding in from the tarmac, a scent that always felt like departure and arrival in the same breath. Her boarding pass said 1C First Class San Diego to Washington, but her jacket was leather and tired. Her jeans were honest, and her hair was tied the way you tie a thing when your mind is somewhere else entirely. The gate agent barely glanced, the line moved, and the cabin opened like a theater stage with soft lighting and thicker carpet. She dropped her gaze the way habit had taught her scanning, without seeming to scan, counting exits, clocking hands, listening for tone. A storm cell sat offshore, temperamental and slow, and the delay notice came in the voice of a flight attendant who had said this sentence 1,000 times. The cabin breathed a collective sigh that curdled into complaint. He was already there. The man with the perfect cuffs and the appetite for small power knees turned just enough to make her ask twice. His sigh was a performance. "You sure you are in the right section?" She showed the rectangle of paper with 1C printed in neat letters and slid past with the economy of someone who had learned to make herself smaller than space. Her phone pulsed once. "Days, not weeks. Please hurry." The letters felt heavier than the duffel at her feet. She answered with a word and then with none, because there are some messages you carry in your chest rather than in your hands. Outside the window, the storm flexed its shoulders and settled in. Inside the cabin, people performed a familiar ritual of impatience, summoning champagne, refreshing emails, building a chorus of small grievances to pass the time. The comments arrived on schedule, floated over the aisle by two women with perfect blowouts and a taste for well-practiced nostalgia. Standards used to mean something up here. Maybe she won an upgrade. A man 2 rows up hovered like a weather vane, turning back every few minutes to join the chorus to make sure the wind was still blowing his way. She tasted the copper of restraint on her tongue and let it dissolve. She had crossed borders where silence was the only armor that kept you breathing. She could cross a cabin. When the senior attendant reached her row, the smile had a tightness at the corners that said there was a conversation happening just behind the teeth. "There has been a booking issue, miss. We will need your seat for another passenger." The words were soft, the decision was not. She checked the boarding pass, looked up, and saw the room watching. She weighed, objecting, measured, the ground, read the faces. Discipline is sometimes choosing to lose a battle not worth winning. "Fine." The word tasted like asphalt. The aisle stretched long, the carpet now a thin strip through a different country. The laughter that follows a sanctioned humiliation has its own timbre, bright and brittle, and it chased her to row numbers that got larger as her ticket shrank. The rear galley had the metal smell of coffee and the hush of people doing their work in a storm. "We are full," the attendant said, soft with apology. "We will find something." She shifted the duffel to her left shoulder, and the jacket rode up at the back just enough for a 7-year-old to see a flash of ink and for curiosity to pull her spine taller. It disappeared as quickly as it came, a glimpse swallowed by fabric and by the hum of an aircraft waiting to be told it could leave the ground. She leaned against the galley bulkhead in the place where crew tucks breath between tasks and steadied herself with the old ritual of inventory. Right hand free, feet planted, eyes moving. She did not mean to bring the war to a place with meal carts and napkins folded like forgiveness. But the war had trained her how to stand inside any room and know the room. The intercom crackled in that familiar way that makes 100 heads turn in unison. "This is Captain Vantage. Air traffic control advises we should receive clearance within 15 minutes. Thank you for your patience." He would come through because some captains still walk their cabins before they take people into weather, and because routine is the religion of those who know the sky's impartial. He stepped out, uniform pressed into authority, and the first-class chorus tuned itself toward him. He answered with the politeness of a man who understands the price of calm. 1C was empty. He noticed. "Is someone missing?" "No, Captain, we had a booking situation." She was accommodating. He nodded, but the slight frown at the corner said he had filed the detail for later. Old habits. This is where small things used to kill, and so you learn to feel the weight of an empty seat. He moved forward until the air changed temperature and the carpet changed texture, and then he saw her the way you sometimes recognize a landmark only when you are very close to it. It was not her face first. It was the posture of a person who has studied balance in moving vehicles and in doorways, where the difference between leaning and falling is counted in heartbeats. It was the way she let the wall hold her without borrowing too much from it. Then the jacket lifted as she adjusted the strap, and the edge of a tattoo surfaced like a coastline, you know by memory rather than by map. A trident. Not the souvenir a fan gets. Not the ink you find in a brochure. The kind with marks inside the marks. The kind that says this story is more complicated than a symbol. He stopped. The cabin noise thinned to a filament. The first recognition was technical, the way you recognize a call sign or a hand signal. The second was human, the way you know a face you have only seen in briefings and redacted paragraphs. He said her name like a person testing a bridge for strength. Lieutenant Commander. Then he said the thing that makes strangers into a chain. Silver Star. Helmand. Her eyes met his and did the math that proves the other person has been where the map runs out. The salute came crisp and clean, ancient as duty and as modern as the aluminum skin around them. It pulled the attention of the nearest rows into a silence that felt like a held breath. He turned to the attendant at his shoulder, and his voice changed keys even as it stayed soft. She will return to her assigned seat in first class. Now. The word carried through the galley and into the cabin and out over the lavish carpet like a small bell that tells a chapel full of people what hour it is. She lifted the duffel and stepped forward. This time the aisle was shorter, or maybe it only felt that way, because the eyes on her held something different. Respect can be awkward when it arrives late. The man with perfect cuffs tried not to shrink from himself and almost succeeded. The one with the phone did not know whether to aim it or pocket it. The captain stood at her right shoulder without making a ceremony of it, and the empty seat opened its mouth like an apology. She sat. The water arrived in a glass that trembled just enough to remind everyone that weather happens at 30,000 feet, and at ground level too. The captain spoke to the cabin in the tone of a man making a promise he expects to keep. We will depart shortly. Thank you for your patience. He did not say more than that up here. He had said what mattered where it mattered. Outside the window, the storm leaned inland, and the aircraft prepared to write a straight line through a crooked sky. Her phone finally found the onboard signal and delivered the message that had been chasing her since morning. He is holding on. He says he is waiting for you. She folded the screen into her palm and looked straight ahead and allowed for the length of one inhale, the kind of weariness that has nothing to do with sleep. Somewhere behind her, a child whispered to a mother, "See, I told you she was a soldier." And in front of her, the world rearranged itself by inches, the way it sometimes does when people see what was there all along. The aircraft lifted out of San Diego with the weight of two storms pressing against its fuselage, one outside in the roiling clouds, the other inside the cabin where silence carried a sharper edge than laughter had earlier. The captain's recognition had redrawn the map of that airplane. Passengers who had mocked now shifted uneasily, their eyes trying to reconcile the woman in worn jeans with the officer who had carried teammates across hostile ground. Respect once denied arrived like a delayed flight, late awkward, but undeniable. She sat in her original seat, the aisle wide enough now to hold her silence. Marcus Langley cleared his throat but found no words worth speaking. Lucian lowered his phone, his ambition for viral content shriveling into shame. A flight attendant, hands trembling, offered her water with a whispered apology. Athalia answered softly, "You couldn't have known. It was the truth and also the lesson." The point of her service had been precisely that no one outside the chain of command should ever know. Across the aisle, an elderly man in a Veterans Affairs cap caught her eye. His nod was small but heavy with history. "Korea," he said. Nothing more. No long speeches, no explanations. Just a single word that carried battlefields, winters, and friends left behind. "Thank you for your service," she replied, automatic yet sincere. His chuckle was low and tired. "When we came home, nobody said that. Funny how things change," she nodded. "Different wars, same scars." Her phone vibrated against the tray table, a new message glowing in the dim cabin lights. "He's holding on, waiting for you." She closed her eyes as the engines pulled the plane through turbulence. For once, she allowed herself to feel tired not in muscle, but in marrow, the fatigue of years spent carrying invisible weight. Dulles International Airport came into view beneath a clearing. Virginia sky, the runway lights stretching like veins of fire against the evening. The landing was smooth, almost gentle, but her chest tightened. The mission she was heading into required no weapon, no strategy, just presence, just love delivered too late and still somehow not late enough. As passengers stood to disembark, something unusual happened. No one rushed the aisle. First class remained seated, eyes lowered, waiting. The lead attendant approached. "Commander, whenever you are ready." Atalia understood. They were letting her go, first a small gesture, a form of respect she neither needed nor sought, but could not dismiss. She collected her duffel and stepped forward. At the aircraft door, Captain Vantage stood at attention. Cap perfectly squared his voice, formal, yet warm. "Thank you for your service, Commander. Godspeed with your father." For a moment her throat closed. She managed only a nod before walking into the jet bridge, the cool air of Washington wrapping around her like a summons. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and endings. She moved down the corridor with the same efficient stride she had used on every base around the world, though her heart pounded a rhythm she had never known in combat. Outside room 437, her brother Kieran waited, his eyes red from sleepless nights. "You made it," he whispered, pulling her into an embrace that spoke of desperation more than greeting. She held him tightly. "How is he for you?" I think Kieran said. Inside, Captain Franklin Desjardins lay against white sheets that made his skin look even paler. 40 years of naval service had made him formidable. Cancer had made him mortal. His eyes opened as she approached, a flicker of recognition lighting his tired face. "My girl," he whispered, "always on time when it matters." She took his hand, the same hand that had taught her to tie knots on a sailboat when she was 8, the same hand that had pinned her commission with pride, despite his earlier doubts. "I'm sorry it took so long," she said. He shook his head faintly. "You were where you needed to be, and in that room with machines humming and the weight of years pressing in the warfighter who had survived Helmand and the daughter who had carried others through fire, finally laid down their arms, if only for a night." Night draped itself over Washington, but in room 437, the lights glowed steady, soft, and sterile. Athalia sat by her father's bedside with the posture of a soldier on watch. She had held vigils before on rooftops in Kabul, in mud-walled compounds in Helmand, but this was different. Here the enemy was silent and merciless, and no extraction plan could alter its timeline. Kieran drifted in and out of restless naps in the chair opposite. The machines ticked quietly, each beep a metronome counting down the beats of a life lived in service. Athalia stayed alert, though her body longed for rest. It was reflex. You do not sleep while someone else's safety depends on your wakefulness. Near dawn, her father's eyes fluttered open. There was a sudden clarity in them, a flare like sunlight on calm water. He focused on her, his voice ragged but deliberate. "The box," he whispered, "in my desk, 3rd drawer." Kieran leaned forward, puzzled. "Dad, what box?" But Franklin's gaze never left his daughter. She nodded. "I'll find it," she promised, and only then did his eyelids sag again. Hours later, his breathing grew shallow. Atalia held his hand's strong fingers, now paper thin, and felt the weight of years between them, 40 years of his service, 15 of hers, and a childhood scattered with both absence and pride. She bent closer as he managed 2 words that carried more force than a battlefield order. "So proud." Then with one final exhale, Captain Franklin Desjardins crossed into calmer waters. Outside his window, dawn was breaking. The Washington Monument stood pale against the first light, a stone sentinel watching over the Capitol. The days that followed blurred into routine, the kind of routine that keeps grief from swallowing you whole. There were calls to make forms, to sign arrangements, to confirm. Athalia handled each with the precision she had carried through countless operations. But in quiet moments, she felt the hollowness seep in a cold draft through cracks she could not seal. In his study, she found the box, a simple wooden case, Navy emblem carved into the lid. Inside were fragments of a life commendation letters, yellowed with time medals he had never displayed, black and white photographs from deployments long past. Beneath them lay a sealed envelope, her name written in his hand, dated nearly 10 years earlier. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. "My dearest Athalia," the letter began, "if you're reading this, I've made my final deployment. Don't grieve too long. Sailors know that tides must change." She read slowly, each line a wave breaking inside her. I've watched your career from afar, learning what little security would allow. What I know makes me proud beyond words. What I don't know, I can imagine. The path you chose is harder than most will ever understand. The weight you carry is invisible to civilian eyes, but I see it. I recognize it because I carried it too, though never as far or as alone as you have. Her throat tightened. Remember this, our greatest service is not in medals or missions, but in the moments we choose others over self. By that measure, you are the finest officer I have ever known. The world may never know your story, but I do. And I could ask for no greater legacy than knowing my daughter stands on the wall, keeping watch while others sleep in peace. Until we meet in calmer waters, Dad. The words blurred through tears she had held back for years. She folded the letter with reverence and placed it back in the box among the quiet artifacts of his life. The funeral at Arlington arrived beneath a sky too blue for mourning. Rows of white headstones stretched like an unbroken formation across the green slope. Athalia stood in her dress uniform medals she rarely wore glinting under the sun. The flag on her father's casket snapped in the breeze as the honor guard folded it with ritual precision. Kieran stood at her side representing the part of the family that had remained civilian, steady on shore, while father and daughter sailed into distant waters. Together they received the folded flag presented with the solemn words, "On behalf of the President of the United States and a grateful nation." She held it with steady hands, though her heart trembled. In the crowd, she recognized faces fellow officers, old shipmates of her father, and to her surprise, Captain Vantage, standing in his airline uniform at the back. Even more unexpected, several passengers from Flight 237 had come. Marcus Langley was there, sober and respectful, no trace of arrogance left. Lucian stood beside him, his phone absent for once. They had not known her father yet. They came to honor him because of her. It was a strange chain of cause and effect, a humiliation in first class, leading to a salute, leading to a gathering at Arlington. Perhaps service always rippled outward in ways you could never predict. As the rifle salute cracked across the cemetery and the bugle played, Taps Athalia felt her spine stiffen with pride and break with grief at the same time. The song had ended wars and buried friends. Now it carried her father into the silence he had earned. When the final note faded, she exhaled slowly. Duty had shaped her life, and now it had brought her here to the end of one story and the uncertain beginning of another. The crowded Arlington slowly thinned mourners, departing in quiet pairs, the crunch of gravel underfoot fading into the distance. Athalia remained at the graveside, the folded flag pressed against her chest like a weight and a shield all at once. The air smelled of cut grass and gunpowder residue from the salute, a mingling of life and finality. An admiral in dress blues approached his chest lined with ribbons, his face marked by years of salt air and command. "Commander Desjardins," he said with a crisp nod, "your father was one of the finest officers I ever served with. The Navy has lost a legend." "Thank you, Admiral," she replied, voice even. He leaned in slightly. "When you're ready, there's a place for you at Naval Special Warfare Command. Your experience is too valuable to leave idle." She gave a neutral nod. Not today. Not yet. The only mission she could see clearly was the one that had just ended, standing watch at her father's side until his last breath. From the edge of the crowd, Captain Vantage waited respectfully before stepping forward. "Commander," he said, extending his hand, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she assured him. "Your father's name carried weight even in other branches. He was highly regarded." Athalia nodded. "He never sought recognition." "The best never do," Vantage said quietly. Then he hesitated before adding, "There's someone who wishes to speak with you." Marcus Langley approached, stripped of his boardroom swagger. His steps were measured, almost hesitant. "Commander, I want to express my condolences," he said, "and to apologize again for my behavior on the flight. I was wrong." "It's forgotten," Athalia answered, her tone steady but not unkind. "Maybe it shouldn't be," Marcus admitted. "Maybe it's something I needed to remember." He paused, swallowing. "My son enlisted yesterday. After I told him what happened on that plane, he said he wanted to be part of something that mattered. For the first time, she studied him not as the man who had dismissed her, but as a father searching for meaning. Then perhaps you've already made amends," she said softly. Before he could reply, a young woman in cadet blues stepped forward, standing at attention. Commander Desjardins, Cadet Embry Calloway. I just wanted to say your service record was declassified anyway. It's been an inspiration. I've applied to BUDES preparatory. They told me women couldn't make it. That's why I applied. Athalia regarded her carefully, seeing in the cadet's posture a familiar fire. For a moment, her hardened exterior softened. Remember this, Calloway, she said. The uniform, the medals, the recognition, none of that makes you who you are. It's who you are that gives meaning to everything else. The cadet's chin lifted. Yes, ma'am. As the girl walked away, Kieran came to stand beside his sister. Dad would have liked her, he said quietly. He would have pushed her twice as hard as the men, Athalia replied, allowing herself the faintest smile. Like he did with us. Days passed in Washington filled with paperwork, condolences, and memories. In her father's study, she sat surrounded by his books and maps, the smell of old paper and pipe tobacco lingering faintly in the air. On the desk, his letter waited, its words echoing, the best served quietly, but sometimes the quiet ones need to be heard. One morning her phone rang. Commander Desjardins, a clear voice said, "This is Grace Holloway, CEO of Atlantic Airways. I wanted to apologize personally for what you endured on our flight. That should never have happened." "That's not necessary," Athalia began. "I disagree," Holloway said firmly. "Captain Vantage made sure I knew the full story. We're implementing new training to ensure no service member is treated with anything less than the respect they've earned." Athalia paused, surprised by the force in the woman's tone. "Then maybe something good came of it," she said. Later, Kieran texted lunch moms asking about you. Their mother, Elizabeth, had long since remarried, long since walked away from the life of deployments and waiting. Yet now she wanted to reconnect. Athalia considered the invitation, then typed back, "I'll be there." When she arrived, cherry blossoms drifted along the DC sidewalks, petals scattering like fleeting reminders of how brief beauty can be. Inside the restaurant, Elizabeth's face carried the careful anticipation of someone approaching fragile ground. Athalia straightened her shoulders and stepped forward, realizing this too required courage, different from the battlefield, but courage all the same. That night she walked the streets of Washington, the folded flag resting at home, her father's letter tucked safely away. For years she had carried the invisible weight of duty, unseen and unacknowledged. But on a plane, in a hospital room, at a graveside, something had shifted. Recognition had come not in medals or headlines, but in nods of respect, in changed hearts, in young cadets daring to follow. And perhaps that was enough. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Athalia Desjardins never sought it. Yet in honoring her, perhaps we all learn to look past appearances to remember that valor wears many faces. Some battles are fought in foreign lands, others in quiet hospital rooms, and still others on ordinary flights where humanity is tested. All require courage. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder of the silent heroes among us. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that honor those who serve without asking to be seen.